Hey there, I'm Joni Simon. Welcome to my studio. This is where I do food photography, and today I am beyond excited to share with you an interview with Betty from Stems and Forks. I've been following her on Instagram for a long time. I adore her work and what she shares online, and I'm super excited to dig in this conversation with her all about how she uses music to influence her work and how you might be able to find music as a source of inspiration for your work. So with no further ado, let's hop on in and talk to Betty from Stems and Forks. So as far as today, we've got a lot of fun things to talk about. But before we dig into what I'm most excited about to talk about today, I mean, obviously I love photography and food photography, but I really want to focus on your expertise in music and how you apply that to your food photography. But before we get there, I want to, just for those who aren't familiar with you, or they know your work but they don't know your story, where did photography begin for you? Where did this whole adventure start?
It started a long time ago, but it didn't really refine itself until the last, I would say, couple years. So I'm well into my 40s, so I'm a lot older than a lot of the kids on Instagram. But in my teen years, my late teen years, in my early 20s, I took night school courses in photography. And this was back when digital was really non-existent. I mean, it was just starting to break through. So it was mainly film, so learning how to use the darkroom. And then I abandoned that just because of the job that I had. It was all consuming, really long hours, and I just didn't have time and abandoned that project. Fast forward, it was a flower shop, by the way. Fast forward 20
Okay.
years later, um, I I sold my business because it was enough. And I decided to pick it up again. And it was different. It was digital this time, and it was a whole new world for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense though, because I mean, anybody who's seen your work knows that there are a lot of floral elements. I mean, it's clearly in the description, forks and stems. You know that's an important part. So that must be interesting being able to bring that back in, just in terms of the context of the food and the flowers. How did the food make its way in then? Because obviously the flowers, that makes sense.
So the food was, I mean, I'm an animal. I love food, right? So, and also just before I got into Stems and Forks, I wanted to do uh, a degree, not a degree, but go to a college, local college, and do confectionery arts. So I wanted to learn to be a baker. And then that college, a week before I was supposed to start, closed down. And I was kind of scrambling to figure out what to do with my life. And so I started the blog. I thought, oh, I'll self-teach myself baking. And so that's how the Stems and Forks became, you know, Stems and Forks.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of really marrying all these different, it's the photography, it's the baking, it's the floral. I mean, all three of those disciplines, what do you see is there a common thread there, something that speaks specifically to you that you kind of, that connects you to all three of those things?
I think it's just beautiful things in life, right? So
Yeah.
flowers, food, photography. I just love, I mean, who doesn't love beautiful things, right? So
I know.
I think it's just a culmination of all the things I love. And that's why in my feed, you'll see a lot of my kids in there as well.
Hmm.
I love my kids.
Celebration of beauty. Absolutely.
Yes,
Yes. And your children are beautiful as well. I think
are.
there was at one point, I can't remember how long ago this was. I mean, you'll remember there was a clothing company, and I felt like your daughter was doing a lot of modeling in these
She
different
was. Yes,
dresses.
yes, yes.
What does she think of all that? Is she on board? I mean, she obviously was willing to do it, but
Well, actually, so this clothing company, 2 + 1 = 2, two lovely ladies in Athens, Greece, they only hired me. Well, they liked my work as well, but they specifically asked my daughter to model because they had seen her in my feed and they just fell in love with the way she looked. And so she had to model. And at the time, she was only, I think, 12 or something. And I basically made her look like a grown up. Um, but she did enjoy it, and then after a couple of dresses she's kind of like, oh, when is this going to be over?
because that
And
was
then
like an entire clothing line.
it was, and then it started becoming like, I'll give you $20 an hour. And now it's really it's hard to get her to model because she's now in
Yeah.
her, well into her teens, and I really have to be like $100. Does that work?
Is you got to really up those modeling fees
I
at this
do.
point and putting that all together. So when people, because I'm sure you get this question, like many of us in this genre of photography, although you even more so, when somebody asks you what kind of photography you do, what do you tell them?
I usually keep it nice and simple. I just say I do product photography. And the reason why I say that is because I don't want to do wedding photography. So if I say I'm a photographer, their immediate reaction is, "Oh, I've got a niece or a cousin getting married." It's like, no.
No, no, thank you. I
Okay.
have a friend who is I'm doing some videos here on the channel with, and he started in combat photography, and he said the only thing scarier than combat photography is wedding photography. So
Well, I agree. I agree. Combat, that's pretty scary, but I could see that being very,
oh yeah.
interesting, and there's never 2 days alike, right?
No, indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. But yeah, for those of us who like something a bit more predictable and a little bit more controlled, I feel like we've found our calling. But so for you, people who follow you online, at least this is something that I have picked up on, and I felt like became very apparent even before you necessarily explicitly shared details of your process. But it's clear that music is an important aspect of your world and what you share in your work, and when you're working in the studio. So for you, where did music come into the equation? Has this been something that's always been important to you, or is this something more recent?
Definitely not recent. So music
Yeah.
has been probably a part of my life, our family's life, for as long as I can remember. My parents are not musicians. My eldest was. She completed a degree in music composition, um, but I did study violin. I didn't go very far. I went far enough to understand sort of the basics, but I think it started. Now I'll get really in depth. When I was in grade 1,
Okay.
and we were very, very poor. And my dad was also very strict and very much about academics and not listening to Michael Jackson and Madonna. So there was a large department store called Zellers, which is the equivalent of Target in the States. And
Okay.
there was always this kind of like clearance bin of musical tapes. Back then it was, I don't know if you remember, it was
Oh yeah,
cassette
cassette
tapes.
tapes. Totally. And they get all strung out and you'd have to reel them
Yes,
back in, and
that's
that
right.
was a mess.
And if you listen to it too much, it would burn the film.
Oh yeah.
So we were only allowed, the three of us, my sisters and I, were only allowed to buy from the discount bin, the 99-cent bin. And of course, it was always classical music, like no one bought it. So I remember picking up a couple of classical music cassettes and listening to it. And that's pretty much when I got really into it. My sisters did like it, but they weren't nearly as hooked on it as I was.
Yeah.
We also didn't have a TV.
Okay.
So really, that was my only source of escape, was listening to classical music. And then throughout the years, I continued to listen to more, delve a little deeply into, because the cassettes that I got from Zellers, it was like, like the Boston Pops kind of
Oh yeah.
classical music hits. So it evolved, and I pretty much now I'm at that point where I'm really, digging deep and looking at all the little beautiful jewels, hidden diamonds.
Yeah,
So that's really where it
absolutely.
started with music.
And for those who aren't familiar with because I think that the classical music world can be intimidating. I mean,
Yes.
yes. Um, just for those is kind of like I don't know, introductory precursor to the idea of what qualifies as classical music, what kind of falls into that genre.
Um, I think it's oh gosh, I'm not a historian.
Exact dates. No, not exact dates.
Gosh. I think
I
it's
mean, what would
generally
be some names, like as far as composers who would be familiar? If somebody's like, I need to Google some classical music, who would be some composers who'd be in that genre?
okay. So I think genre-wise, it's like I want to say it's about. You could go as far back as 1000, year 1000, but I
Okay.
think generally for classical in the general sense is about 1500 to about 1900.
Mm-hmm.
maybe 1850s, like up to a classical period. I mean, the Romantic period. So classical music kind of encompasses Baroque, classical, the Romantic period. Um, but in terms of composers that are really famous, Beethoven, Mozart, Handel, Bach, Brahms, Chopin, those are probably the big guns, right, in the classical
Yeah.
music world.
The
Um,
guys with the big puffy wigs and
that's right. But I think in terms of if they wanted to get to know classical music, something easy to listen to, Mozart and Beethoven are kind of the easiest ones to digest.
Mm-hmm. And so for you, when you are in and you're working, because it's pretty clear that you've always got music going. What have you been listening to recently while you're doing photography?
I have, well, I'm a huge,
All
massive
over?
Bach fan. I mean, it's just I've loved him since the beginning, and I still love him. He's such a genius. I mean, the guy is just brilliant. But I do love Handel. So lately, it's been a lot of just because I've had more time because of COVID as well. I've been delving more into Bach when he was young. So in his younger years, his lesser known works, some of his cantatas, which are really beautiful. So I've been listening to a lot of, I guess, vocal works, church songs.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
sound like such an
Absolutely.
old lady.
No, well, I've got a little rule around here that I don't let myself listen to Handel's Messiah until Thanksgiving, because otherwise I would like, I don't know if it's possible, but I feel like I'd burn myself out on it. So then I just like play it nonstop until Christmas.
Oh, I listen to Handel all year round. I mean, Messiah all year round. It is
Do you?
really a brilliant piece of body of music, you know?
It is. And I feel like, and I'm sure you get this experience too, as you listen to different things that it's just like your work, I feel like you look, and even just images that we love, the more exposure you have to it, the deeper you dig into it.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So one thing, and what kind of prompted all of this? Well, what prompted this initially was that I had put out to Instagram. I said, "Hey, who should I feature on the channel? Who should I bring in for a conversation?" And your name came up as somebody that is well loved, who's well loved on Instagram. And so I'm excited to chat. But I was especially excited, and what I want to talk about is because you had recently shared in line with a series that you'd done about visualizing music. And you had done this great little series of maybe 10 panels on Instagram stories about how you take a piece of music and how you visualize it. And so I was like, oh, this is what we should talk about. This will be very fun. And so I thought what would be helpful is if we could go into a very specific image that you've shared. Now, for those who missed the little series of stories, I'll be sure to link those below so you can check that out. I believe that was it using Beethoven? Was your example in the
I
Instagram
did
stories?
Beethoven's Symphony Number 5, the really famous one, the dun 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 dun. Yeah, and the singing is horrid, but yeah, that one.
It's like probably one of the world's most universally recognizable songs.
Absolutely. Yeah, I figured that would be kind of a nice segue into teaching people or sharing with people how I, visualize music.
Yeah, for some reason, when I hear that, I always go to, did you watch the Muppets at all growing up?
Yes, of
Remember this
course.
show? And so there was, and maybe it was the Moonlight Sonata, I can't remember, but there was a Muppets episode where somebody's at the piano and there's like this bust on the piano and the bust is falling asleep while he's playing the sonata. So I can't help but like get that visual out of my head right at this moment. So anyway, back on track, away from the Muppets. So you shared this beautiful image. I'm going to go ahead and post it here on the screen. So this particular image, which I feel like is just full of all sorts of delicious nuggets and little moments here. But what I wanted to have you talk through is sort of the process. Before we get into that, I love how you've titled this. It's a Herculean side project of mine to persuade that Baroque music is cool. And that is an official hashtag for those who want to use it. Baroque. Is that a trending hashtag, Betty?
No, I think there's only 2 posts and they're both mine.
Dang it. But before we talk about your process and how you used the music, it was inspired by the well-tempered clavier. So can you tell me, share with us, what is the story of that piece and why is it so significant to you that it would inspire you to create such a fantastic work?
So that comes back to that first cassette that I bought at Zeller's, which had the first piece of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And it was, I think it's C major, and it's very famous. It's where the song Ave Maria comes from. So if you could hum Ave Maria in your head, that song came from the Well-Tempered Clavier. So I remember listening to that going, oh my gosh, this is glorious, so beautiful. And now I listen to it, I'm like, oh, it's one of, overplayed, overdone. But then as I delve deeper into the other pieces of music in that body of work, I immediately fell in love. And of course, I think he made 2 books, and I think there's about 40 something pieces, 48, I want to say. So it's quite a lengthy collection of works. But that's why I use this piece, because I thought I'm going to make it my little side project to tell people that you don't have to be a complete loser to be listening to Baroque music. It is actually quite a beautiful form and, cool genre of music. And so I picked the song, sort of the cassette that introduced me to the whole process of loving classical music. And that's why.
That's why you selected that. Yeah, because I fired it up the other day on YouTube, because there's plenty of recordings of the entirety of it, and it's like an hour and 45 minutes for the one book. And it was so interesting, because you're right, there are so many recognizable, not only the Ave Maria, I mean, there's just a ton. It felt like, especially those first 20 minutes, there were so many tunes that worked their way into popular culture, into film, into all sorts of other applications. So for those who haven't listened to it, aren't familiar with it, we'll link it below. And just highly encourage you, next time you're doing anything but food photography, you can put that on and find some inspiration. So as far as that particular piece in that process, so you've got this piece of music, and you've got in theory some sort of concept, but can you walk us through that visualization process? Because clearly there's so much going on in this image. Where did it start? What was sort of that starting place?
So I wanted to start with the fact that I was introduced to classical music as a child. Also, I wanted to pick the piece that kind of represented my childhood. So I had shared it with you. It's this very kind of fast, chaotic, winding piece with this constant left hand playing almost like a heartbeat, or I felt like it was a bit like me as a child, because I was basically Lucifer as a kid. I was just a horrible, rotten kid. I still have memories of doing tricks and pranks on my parents and cops being involved. I was really, really.
Betty's got a rap sheet, y'all.
Oh yeah, I'd need another 2 hours to tell you all the pranks I used to do. But so I listen to that. I think of the left hand pulse as my parents, or as my teachers getting me in trouble all the time. And that whirlwind high key going really fast, like a bee, being me, just going around as a kid, stirring trouble. And I wanted to kind of incorporate that in this image. But I also wanted to show the evolution of that growth of my interest in music, which was, it went from just listening to it and liking it to really loving it and being ashamed of it in high school and hiding it from people, but not also knowing anything about music of the time. So, at the time it was Backstreet Boys and Mariah Carey in high school, and I had no idea what songs they were singing, and I felt a bit ashamed. So I wanted to show that kind of evolution of how I went from just liking a piece of music to really hiding it, to really thriving in enjoying it.
Yeah. Well, and that was sort of kind of going back to the Beethoven piece, that same sort of personifying different pieces of the music, that different instruments and different moments are sort of encapsulated. Those voices are kind of translated. So as far as then from the standpoint of that playing out visually, so you've kind of identified, here's your parents, this is you. How do you start to assign visual representations to those things?
So it was kind of like, I kept hearing that line from Game of Thrones. I don't know if you watched that series.
I don't, but it's a little intense for me, but my husband's a huge fan.
There was a line where someone kept saying to one of the main characters, Jon Snow, kill the boy. And so I kept hearing it, kill the girl, kill the girl. And so I have in the image a little kind of a few roots hanging with a little seedling that's half dead. So for me, that was kill the girl, and be the woman now. And I got that from, I know it sounds all crazy, but
I love all the references, pulling them together.
Yeah, so it was, and the visualization from the well-tempered clavier. I mean, I guess it wasn't a literal interpretation from this piece, but it was more my own personal vision that I interpreted or extracted from that body of work, which was just the growing up, just the coming into who I am today. But if you wanted me to share how we should visualize, I mean, I could kind of share that a little bit about that.
Please do. Yeah, that'd be wonderful. What's that process like?
So if I were to review a little bit about what I spoke on in the Instagram stories on Beethoven's Fifth, to visualize music for me, the way I process it is, music is it's pretty much like art. I mean, it is art. Sorry, not making any sense. Music is an expression of our emotions, and so is visual art. I mean, visual art is an expression of our emotions, right? But it uses certain senses. So music uses our hearing senses, visual arts uses our sight. So based on that, you have to look at music and listen to music and say, what emotion is this evoking in me? And then based on that emotion, you create a visual. So in other words, if you hear something that sounds happy and joyful, then what is happy and joyful visually? You could take it a step further and say, is there a story in the song? And usually there is. So you could say, it started off really hopeful and energetic, but then it kind of went awry. It sounds like it's going awry, but it sounds like it resolved. So right there, you just had like 3 acts, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And based on that, you could create a visual story. So that's kind of my process. So it basically boils down to is what emotions are being evoked by this piece of work.
Yeah. And that can be so very subjective depending on, how you interpret happy, how you interpret death, how you interpret all these various feelings, experiences, and emotions. And so pulling then, what would be props that would be appropriate to that? What would be foods appropriate to that? So, so for this particular image that you've created, there's a lot of different, like the thing that kind of jumps out to me, because I think the colorful component for sure, I mean, you kind of dig deeper into the layers of the image, but, we're seeing, all the fresh vegetables and all of the fruits and things like that. What were those representative of in the music for you?
Well, in the music,
so. Or what were they kind of? What was the story of incorporating those? What choice happened there to put those into the scene?
The well-tempered clavier was based on scales, so it's basically like an exercise for pianists, and there was no pianist back then. It was more like harpsichords and clavichords and organists, but he created these scales so that it was like a study, just to practice these scales. But they were beautiful. I mean, considering that they were just practices. So I wanted to take kind of my entire life and kind of sum it in this image, it's been a lot about flowers and arranging. Like pretty much the majority of my adult years was arranging flowers, and then evolved into food. So I kind of wanted to take that concept of arranging flowers, but take something edible and then create, I mean, there's a few flowers in there, but it's mainly edible food. So I wanted to create something that was very autobiographical. Oh my gosh, do I have the right word? Okay.
Yeah.
To encompass kind of my entire scale, which is my life, and that's why I chose
so much sense.
The food. Yeah,
makes
I know.
So
like
much
a lot
sense.
of people aren't looking at that going, yes, I see it all, but it was more for me. It was more my little journey. And if I could create my journey into something that's visually beautiful, that
Mhm.
can pique people's interest, then great. Why not?
Right. But you're making it, and I think these kind of works are so important to us creatively, is to do work for you.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, you do a lot of um, work for other people. I mean,
Yeah.
you're kind of shooting their vision, but on, you know, when you're shooting fun stuff for your own feed, you want to do
Mhm.
something that speaks to you,
Mhm.
resonates with you, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because I'm sure you're like, huh, what are people going to think about this when you post something like that? I don't know if that moment crosses your mind.
Oh, yeah. Betty's really lost her mind now.
It's just, I love it though, because now I see it definitely, because I had to think though, there's probably a lot of wires hiding in that scene, huh?
There's a lot of wires. Oh yeah, you notice that all the berries
No,
hanging
I
and
mean, I just
dangling.
had to imagine because I was like, how do you suspend all of these various elements on these very delicate, I'm like, that took some, I mean, clearly you know what you're doing. So that's
All those
impressive.
little corsages I made for 20 years.
All coming through. I love
Yeah.
it. Um, so now when it comes to, you had mentioned, and I love this, the idea, and maybe you already touched on it, but in any piece of music, just like any image, and I think this is something you're so thoughtful at in all of your images, is that sort of that moment, the little jewel, the little nugget, the little secret. In this image, what would you say is, I mean, maybe there's several, but what's one of the key moments in this image for you?
There are definitely several. So the artichokes with
Mhm.
its stem sticking out, as opposed to the face. So when you think of artichokes, you think of the bloom as being the most beautiful, right? Not
Mhm.
the stem. So the artichokes in this image, the I already explained the little sprout with the roots in the keyboard, and
Yeah.
then the pomegranate. So those are my three little beautiful treasures, my little diamonds in my picture.
Yeah. Because that was definitely something that stood out to me looking at the pomegranates, kind of the way that there was, I mean, clearly, anytime we're doing food photography and still life, we're intentionally placing things. It's not like that pomegranate just showed up missing kind of that piece, but showing that little jewel box of all those little nuggets inside. So I love that. So thinking about, so for those out there who are watching this, just thinking about how you can incorporate, I mean, would you have advice, Betty, for people who are thinking, oh, how do I add those little moments? Where does that inspiration come from? What are some things somebody could do to get inspired to add some additional thoughtfulness to their images?
Um, so I guess what I think is I do always say in my head, actually, what moment can I add in here?
Hmm.
So I gave a few examples in those stories, but I could give a few more. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm always the gal who gravitates to the misfit, the oddball, the odd bird in the gang. So I always try to make a little moment a little odd. And are you there, Joni? I think I
Oh
lost
yeah.
you.
Oh, are you there?
There you are. Okay, it says it's
We're back.
unstable.
Me and
Right.
the internet, we're both unstable. It's okay.
Story of my life. Unstable.
Oh, no worries. So we could just backtrack to the idea of identifying with the misfit.
Ah, yes. So I tend to always have like that stray grape off to the side, or that it could even be uh l- um a slice of cake that's been bitten into, or the placement of your subject. So it could be off center, um to kind of show that he's not, part of the gang, that he's a little bit off, always off
Yeah.
center. But that's just me. I mean, not everyone is going to agree with that. People might like things that are very centered and perfect, and no misfits, no oddballs. But I find that when you do something like that, when you put that pomegranate with a couple of seeds kind of hanging out and the skin peeled back, you're revealing more about, you know, the subject that you're photographing than something that's, I should just say it, plain and mediocre, which is just simply putting a cake right in the middle and having the right lighting. I mean, to me, that might look fundamentally correct and lovely, but it doesn't evoke any emotions or any kind of, you know, anything in me. It doesn't move me. And so when you put these little moments and these little pearls, as we call it, you are creating an emotion. You're grabbing people, you know.
Yeah. And that's when you make the leap then from, say, for example, commercial photography, where we're creating something with a specific advertising intention versus something that's truly artistic to express an emotion, to express a feeling, to connect with somebody in a unique way. To me, that's two very different methods of going about doing food photography.
Oh, definitely. I would never do the stuff that I do for myself for my clients. Are you kidding? I get fired immediately.
Although if you can find that client that wants that you've got a client for life.
That's true. That's true. There are a couple. I mean, the social media influencing element where they hire you to do, you know, ads on your feed. Most of them are actually okay with the way you do things because they want it organic to how you present your work. But in terms of making product shoots for another company that they'll put on their digital channels, no, that doesn't happen.
No, not too. And that's why we need personal work. That's the answer at the end of the day.
Feel fulfilled, yeah.
Exactly. So when it comes to visualizing music, I mean, obviously the examples we've shared here today are all classical in nature, but is this something that people can do with any kind of music?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's easier to take a song, like if Taylor Swift's song Shake It Off, I mean, that's pretty obvious what that song's about. There won't be
You don't have to dig too deep on the meaning on that one.
So I mean, you really can do it with anything. I just prefer music without words to do visualizations because it's more challenging, it's fun. It's just more thrilling, I think.
Yeah, well, and I would say too, part of what I observed was that it also requires a certain amount of in digging into the context of that music, when it was created, why it was created, you know, talking about Beethoven going deaf and how that informed the decisions of, you know, that composition. And so I think that, you know, if you want to dig deeper into music, an easy way to appreciate it, like, you know, Handel's Messiah, you know, I wasn't necessarily a huge classical music fan, but in order to dig deeper into that music, you know, reading about it and understanding Handel and his background, and you know, learning opera and learning about opera, I was like, it's just a bunch of people singing loud, and you know, you think of the Die Valkyrie and all that, but at the end of the day, you start to dig into it and learn the story. So for anybody who, you know, feels like a fish out of water in the world of classical music, opera, or any sort of art or genre that you feel unfamiliar with, it's that digging deeper in and you'll suddenly fall in love. I mean, do you have any particular like if you were to say to somebody who, you know, wanted to dip their toe into the water, you already kind of mentioned it, that Beethoven and Mozart, is there a particular piece though that you would say somebody should listen to if they want to dig deeper into the world of Baroque and classical music?
Baroque, I would say the most sort of digestible and accessible with Baroque is Vivaldi. I mean, everyone knows the Four Seasons, my least favorite, but but it is very digestible and it's very easy to listen to. I think, you know what I should do? I should do a Spotify playlist.
Ooh.
I should work on one. I have been approached by several people to do one. I just haven't gotten around to it because I have my own playlists, but they're a little bit neurotic. It might be one song like 3 times over because I love it so much. And then, so I should actually put together. I'll do that. I'll do that after. And
I love that, because, you know, it's kind of like, the gateway into the larger, you know, it's like you start drinking Starbucks coffee, and turns you into more of a, you know, then you get deeper into the coffee world. So yeah, start people Got to start them somewhere.
So I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did, and that hopefully you're feeling inspired to play some different music when you're doing your food photography. Maybe you'll dig into that world of Baroque music and classical music. But thank you again so much to Betty, and thank you to you for spending the time with us here today. So with that, you stay out of trouble, and we'll see you soon, okay? Bye.